What happens when a war machine begins to run out of fuel? Not on the battlefield, but inside the very core of its economy. Right now, far from the front lines in Ukraine, Russia's economy is showing signs of a dangerous fracture. A fracture that, if it continues to widen, could undermine the Kremlin's ability to sustain its war effort altogether. Many expected the Russian central bank to respond with extreme measures. Instead, what they did shocked analysts worldwide. A tiny cut, a cautious move. Like watching someone bleed out and offering them a single drop of water. The question now echoing through financial markets is deeply unsettling. Is the Russian economy quietly bleeding to death? And could this mark the early stages of the collapse of Russia's war machine? Just days ago, the Central Bank of Russia made a decision that left economists puzzled. At a moment when inflation is surging and economic growth is stalling, the world expected bold action. Instead, Russian policymakers trimmed interest rates by just 1%, lowering them to 17%. On paper, that may sound reasonable. But amid the storm battering Russia's economy, it was the equivalent of whispering into a hurricane. Analysts had expected a deep cut, something dramatic enough to breathe life into a slowing system. This hesitant move sent a far darker signal instead. Russia may be running out of viable options. Even within Kremlin circles, alarm bells are ringing. Earlier this month, Russia's own Minister of Economic Development publicly admitted that the economy is cooling far faster than anticipated. And it's not just cooling, it's beginning to freeze. At the same time, Russia's finance minister stood before Vladimir Putin and delivered another grim confession. Growth projections for 2026 had been slashed from 2.5% to just 1.5%. That was already bad. But now, internal voices are quietly suggesting that even 1.2% could be wildly optimistic. This is not the profile of a healthy economy. It's the sound of brakes screeching as a vehicle races toward the edge of a cliff. Russia isn't simply facing a slowdown, it is staring directly into the threat of stagflation. That word alone sends chills through economists. It represents the worst possible combination, stagnant growth, paired with stubbornly high inflation. It's a vicious trap. And once an economy falls into it, escape can take years, sometimes decades. The warning came from a source impossible to dismiss: the CEO of Sberbank, Russia's largest financial institution. He openly declared that the country has entered a phase of technical stagnation. Put simply, the engine that once powered Russia's growth is seizing up. For a country trying to finance one of the most expensive wars of the modern era, this is not merely a problem, it is an existential threat. And the bleeding doesn't stop there. New data from Russia's Ministry of Finance reveals something even more alarming. Between January and July, the federal budget deficit exploded to 4.88 trillion rubles, roughly 61 billion US dollars. Pause on that number. It has already exceeded the entire deficit target for 2025. In other words, halfway through the year, Russia has already burned through more money than it planned to lose in a full future year. The Kremlin now faces impossible math: somehow recover billions in the second half of the year just to stay within its own targets. The reality is blunt. That will not happen. Russia's war chest is hemorrhaging, and the timing couldn't be worse. Because just as spending spirals out of control, revenue is collapsing. For decades, Russia's economy rested on a single pillar: energy exports. Oil and gas were the golden river financing Moscow's ambitions. But now that river is drying up. Global oil prices have weakened, slicing into profits. The ruble has unexpectedly strengthened, meaning each barrel sold brings in fewer rubles. And on top of that, Ukraine has launched a sustained campaign of strikes against Russian oil depots and pumping stations, disrupting logistics and unnerving investors. The message is unmistakable. The financial pillar holding up Russia's war effort is cracking. Even the Central Bank of Russia acknowledged this in its own interest rate statement, admitting that business activity is slowing especially in export-oriented sectors. Yet officials insist the economy remains positive. But anyone who follows the numbers can see the trajectory clearly. It is plunging and heading straight toward negative growth. And behind all of this, something even more dangerous is beginning to take shape. Secondary sanctions are the silent killers of global finance. Unlike direct sanctions that openly target a specific country, secondary sanctions threaten any third-party nation or business that continues dealing with Russia. They function like invisible tripwires. One misstep, and a company risks being cut off from Western markets altogether. And that fear is spreading. A striking example came recently from Donald Trump, who imposed a 50% tariff on India. Half of that tariff was linked to unrelated trade negotiations, but the other half was punishment. Punishment because India has become the single largest buyer of Russian energy, especially oil. This was not symbolic. It was a warning shot, a message to every country still funneling money into Russia's war economy. You could be next. If secondary sanctions keep expanding, they could choke off the last remaining streams of foreign revenue Russia desperately relies on. And the most unsettling part is this pressure is only beginning. The implications for the war are enormous. Every shell fired, every missile launched, every tank repaired, every single action is paid for by Russia's economy. And right now, that economy is showing clear signs of internal bleeding. Factories producing military equipment are experiencing uneven activity, especially those tied to exports. The ruble's unpredictable swings make long-term procurement planning nearly impossible. Growing budget deficits force the government to slash spending in some areas just to sustain the war effort in others. It's like trying to seal leaks in a sinking ship by tearing pieces off the hull. The more money the Kremlin diverts to the military, the more civilian sectors suffocate, and the weaker the overall economy becomes. Inside Russia, public sentiment is beginning to shift as well. The average citizen may not read central bank statements, but they feel the pain directly. Rising food prices, rent and fuel costs collide with stagnant wages. Small businesses struggle as consumer demand fades. Even Russia's once proud industrial regions are now seeing layoffs and production cuts. This type of stagnation doesn't just damage GDP figures, it erodes morale. And in a war that demands total national commitment, cracks in public support can be just as deadly as losses on the battlefield. Now comes the most dangerous twist of all. The Russian government faces an impossible choice. Cut interest rates aggressively to revive growth and unleash even more inflation, or keep rates painfully high to crush inflation and watch the economy grind to a halt. There is no good exit. This strategic paralysis exposes how fragile Russia's war footing has become. Every option carries catastrophic risk. Lower rates could collapse the ruble. Higher rates could crush growth. Either way, the war machine loses fuel. That's why the central bank's decision to cut rates by only 1% sent shockwaves through global markets. It wasn't confidence, it was fear. A signal that even Russia's own financial authorities may no longer trust the stability of their system. So what happens next? If Russia's economy continues this downward spiral, the consequences will spill directly onto the battlefield in Ukraine. Supply lines will weaken. Maintenance for tanks, aircraft, and artillery will slow. Replacing lost equipment will become increasingly difficult. Soldiers may face shortages, not just of ammunition, but of basic protective gear. Beyond the battlefield, the political costs could explode. A government that cannot provide economic stability risks internal unrest. Even quiet murmurs among Russia's elites could grow louder as their wealth evaporates and their global assets remain frozen. A military stalemate abroad combined with financial collapse at home. That is the nightmare now haunting the Kremlin. This is the hard truth. Wars are not won by armies alone. They are won or lost by the economies that sustain them. Right now, Russia's economy is slowing, bleeding, and cracking under the combined weight of war, sanctions, and collapsing exports. The central bank's timid move has only deepened the sense that the worst may still lie ahead. The world is watching as the Kremlin races against time. If it cannot revive growth, control inflation, close its budget gap, and escape the tightening noose of secondary sanctions, then Russia's war in Ukraine may collapse, not through military defeat but through economic implosion. The battlefield may be far away, but the true front line, the one that could decide the fate of this war, may be the crumbling balance sheets in Moscow. As cannons thunder in Ukraine, the quiet ticking of economic collapse grows louder inside Russia. The question is no longer whether the Kremlin can keep fighting. The question is, how long before the money runs out, and the entire war effort collapses under its own weight? Because if the economy falls, everything else follows.